Hello, everyone, and welcome to another very special episode. She Scores Bangers is teaming up with the Northern Super League over the next few weeks to bring you exclusive interviews with players and others that are gearing up for their inaugural season, set to kick off on April 16th. The NSL, founded by former Canada International Diana Matheson, is Canada's first ever professional women's soccer league, with 6 clubs based in Halifax, Calgary, Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. You can catch the action on CBC, TSN, and other online streaming platforms. Today's guest is a born and raised Calgarian who became a trailblazer by making history as the first AUS player to compete in the Champions League. However, an early retirement due to health reasons pulled her to explore other aspects of the sport, where she founded an athlete agency and is now the sporting director of Calgary Wild. Tasked with putting together a wicked yet wild roster, it's none other than Alix Bruch. Alix, it's a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm great. Thanks. Yeah, really excited to be here.
How's the new year treating you so far?
It's awesome. As I keep saying to everyone I'm on calls with today, the sun is shining in Calgary. The sky is blue, and it's above zero. So can't
Y-
complain about that in mid-January.
You don't see that very often in Calgary where it's that warmish this early on in
Yeah.
the season.
Yeah, it's a perk of living here. We get our blue sky days. That's how I'm selling it to all the players and staff to come here. I'm like, we're the sunniest city in Canada.
It doesn't snow. It's super warm. You don't get a breeze, nothing. It's beautiful. I feel like
It's perfect.
that's a good way to pitch it for Calgary.
hmm
Alix, I wanted to hear a little bit about your journey because it's all very unique and special. And I think like many involved in the sport and in the NSL, you were a player who excelled tremendously at the level that you played at. Tell me a little bit about the frustration of doing so well and having a very bright career at that age of around 18, 19, and wanting to go professional after university, but there was nothing here at home in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, frustrating is a good way to say it, and I'm not alone in that. There's a whole generation of players like me that went through it. And once I started the process of exploring playing professionally, it was just obstacle after obstacle. But to be honest, when I graduated, playing pro wasn't even really on my radar. I went my entire career really not knowing there was anything more. I would see glimpses of the national team on TV when I was growing up, when the networks decided to show it. But it made no sense to me how you actually got there. No one around me was doing it. There was no pathway to play professionally, and obviously no league here. And even when I graduated, the NWSL had only been around for about a year. So it was really in its infancy and coming off, the failed leagues before it, it really didn't quite have the momentum, that it would gain years after. But um, so I mean, I did what everyone else did after university. I kind of just hung up my cleats and started playing rec soccer, which was it was fun. But it was actually the 2015 Women's World Cup that was in Canada. That really shifted things for me. I was working as a geologist at the time, and I started devouring women's soccer content while I worked. Goes to show, that wasn't really the career for me. But it was really the time when women's soccer was becoming more visible. We were seeing podcasts and interviews on YouTube, and I started to actually see, I'm like, oh, like there actually is a pathway here. Like people are doing this. And so I went to a couple of games in Edmonton with my university coach, and he was the one who first told me I could go pro and I should maybe explore it. And so the seed was planted, and from there, I honestly kind of just put my head down and didn't look back. And those who know me well know that once I have an idea in my head, I tend to hit go, and that's it. I mean, I think if you look at my resume, you probably understand that a little bit.
Hmm.
And I mean, sometimes I do have a little kind of punch in my gut, a little pang, when I see all these opportunities in this league and everything that's happening with women's sports, because man, I wish I had that.
Yeah.
But the feeling never lasts long because I'm so thrilled we're here now and women's sport is seeing this growth and I get to be a part of it is really, really cool.
Hmm.
I'll quote one of my favorite quotes is by Mary Oliver. So I guess that's more poetry than a quote, but it says, "What blazes the trail is not necessarily pretty." And I think I've very much been a trailblazer throughout my life and my career.
Hmm.
not always by choice, and it's not always glamorous. But it's so worthwhile. You know, I wouldn't change anything, honestly. I'm so excited we are where we are right now.
Mm. And I mean, you went back to the sport, even though you were far away from it. You were doing your day job. It wasn't like you were like, okay, I want to be a professional player. You then do a little bit of history actually by becoming the first women's soccer player from a Nova Scotia university to sign a professional deal in Serbia. What was that searching process like? Did you go on trials in different countries? What was the process to get to the moment of putting pen to paper of a professional contract after being away from the sport for a little while?
Yeah, it was long and it wasn't pretty. It was difficult for sure. You know, when I made the decision, I was going to go for it. I knew first I needed to get back in a competitive environment because I was playing competitively in Calgary, but you can essentially call it like beer league soccer. You know, it was all former university players who were just playing for fun, like a couple times a week. And I mean, it was a huge decision to make. I mean, I quit my career essentially. I'd been in for about 2 years and my stable paycheck. And so I actually ended up going back to St. FX. I had 1 year of eligibility left because in Canada you get 5 years. And that was a really hard decision going back because at that point, I mean, I'd been out for 2 years, and I think most people who've been to university, they can kind of understand, you know, the hesitation to go back into that sort of environment when you're a bit older, you've been out in the world. And so I felt a little bit old and a little bit weird, you know, going into classes and going back to that world. But at the end of the day, I mean, it was the best decision I could have made. But I think that's the best soccer I've ever played. We won the championship, the conference championship that year for only, I think that was the third time in history. I think now it's four.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, following that, I honestly thought it would be a lot easier than it was. I stitched my own highlight video together, kind of Googled how to do that, and it ended up being 17 minutes long. Um,
Lots of highlights.
yeah, it lives on YouTube. But and then yeah, I essentially I made a database of clubs. I'd Google a country, find the league, and then go to each website and find the contact person at the club. And this stuff was not as readily available as it is now, and everything's in other languages. So it took me forever, honestly. And I started just sending emails with my video and my profile, kind of being like, pick me for your team. And, you know, most mornings I woke up to disappointment. I mean, you know, now that I'm in this seat, like you see just how many emails you're getting. And when you receive an email from a player across the world, it's really hard to place it, right? So there were a number of clubs that showed interest and I kind of had conversations, but there were so many barriers just with like visas and housing and moving to a foreign country. And so I ended up being in Calgary a lot longer than I anticipated. I actually ended up playing for the Foothills UWS team here, which
Mm.
is now kind of our reserve team. And that was the first year that team existed too, which is cool. I got to be a part of that. But it was when I decided to get an agent that everything changed. And at the time, there really weren't many working in women's soccer, especially in North America. Now it's completely different. But at that time, I think I found like four names. So um, after I signed the contract with them, I mean, the opportunity came about a week later, and then I was on a flight like 2 weeks later. So it happened really fast after that. And then I was suddenly living across the world.
I mean, it's fascinating how it all works out because, again, it feels like there's so much uncertainty with that process and there's so many unknowns, and it's like you're putting your faith into something that might not even work out, and then all of a sudden it does work out. And you go abroad. I think you have a great time over there from what it seemed. You play Champions League, you get to enjoy some of that European football, but then you return back home. It kind of some health issues leads to a bit of an early retirement, but you come back and you start coaching. Uh, what was the process of being like, I still want to stick to the game, but I want to take a different perspective of it and explore coaching? Because that's a topic I think that now in the NSL, we're looking to improve and have more female coaches in the game. And hopefully with this league, it's going to plant a seed of more females going into coaching and staying here in Canada.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, upon returning home, I mean, you mentioned some health issues, and I think I've maybe mentioned this a couple times here and there, but I had a lot to sift through when I came home. As incredible as the experience was, playing Champions League and living out my dream, I mean, that was incredible, but it was also a very hard time. It was very isolating,
Mm,
especially where I was in Serbia. There was only a handful of people on the team that could speak English.
mm,
Um, the culture was very different, but mostly I was living with a lot of pain. I didn't know it then, but I've since been diagnosed with endometriosis. And it was around that time my pain was like really getting bad, and that was quite scary to be honest, dealing with that in a foreign country. So especially not even knowing what was going on. So I only got answers about 2 years ago. That was like 4 years later. So I definitely had a lot to deal with when I got home, and a lot of this work that I've done on that has been just within the last year, to be honest, which
mm.
is why I'm more comfortable talking about it now. But it was a rough transition for sure. And I did have opportunity to go play elsewhere. I had some offers in Spain and Sweden, but it just didn't make sense to me, and for my health. So I actually completely removed myself from soccer when I got home. There was a little gap until
Mm.
I went into coaching a bit. And I was living in Calgary, and I went out to Nova Scotia for a wedding in the fall. And again, it was my university coach, Graham Kennedy. He's a good friend of mine now, but he just puts these things in my head, and he asked me if I wanted to move out there for the season and help him coach. So of course, I went home to Calgary, packed my bags, and flew back out about 4 days later. So, um, yeah, I felt really nice being out there again. Honestly, I think that I needed to heal a lot with my relationship to the sport. And so I wouldn't say I became a coach. I did, some basic licensing, and I coached with him that season, and I did dabble in it over the years. But coaching was never really my calling. I had done it as a teenager too. I'd kind of been here and there, but um, I actually ended up going back to school. I did that 1 year journalism degree because I wanted to find my way in women's sport. I wanted to be involved, but coaching didn't feel right, and I didn't know what the heck else you could do. So I ended up doing a lot of writing on women's sports, and I actually did write a story about the lack of female coaches in this country. And that was fascinating, talking to current coaches in U sports. And I think at the time there was only 4 or 5 across the country.
Wow.
Um, I don't know what the number is now, but um, yeah, it was really interesting to hear, the different perspectives people take on why there is such a lack of female coaches. But I'm really excited that 3 out of the 6 teams in the NSL have a female head coach, and that's amazing. The visibility obviously is so important for young players coming up in the sport, that, they get to look at these coaches on the sidelines, and, we need more women in coaching, and I'm sorry I'm not one of them, but it's massive. So it's definitely great that we're seeing a shift in that.
Mhm. Well, it's worthwhile mentioning as well. Calgary is one of the teams that does have a female head coach of Lydia Bedford, which is fantastic. But I think to see that ratio, and I don't doubt that it's going to cause a ripple effect of university coaches, local grassroots coaches, of female coaches in the game that will hopefully increase across time. But Alex, it seems like you explored a lot of different areas of the game. You saw that it was really difficult to explore professional opportunities. You tested out coaching, you tested out coverage. Like you really studied what the sport needed and what it wanted because it sounds like you wanted to fill that gap. Um, and you did start an athlete agency shortly after. Tell me a little bit of your vision with that and what that experience was like to go into that field and help other professional players get their contracts. What was that process like from a previous player who didn't have the best time with that experience?
Yeah. Shift Athletes is what my agency was called. It's my COVID side project while I was working full time. But yeah, I had come out of that journalism degree trying to figure out, how I wanted to make an impact in sport. I wasn't working in sport. My job was something else. But as you mentioned, I was the first female player in Atlantic Canada to play professionally. And I saw 2, 3, 4 years later, there was a few more taking the jump, and I started to notice more Canadians across the country were suddenly starting to play abroad. It still wasn't a huge number, but definitely way more. And I was seeing more agents showing up in the space. You're seeing just more, I guess, built out around the professional game.
Mhm.
And I kind of thought, well, I bet they're also having a heck of a time navigating this. So I saw the gap and I decided I was going to, build a bridge or at least help and do what I can. And so again, I got the idea and I just kind of dove all in and I took an entrepreneur startup course. I fumbled through incorporating a business. I brainstormed my business name with my roommates while we were in lockdown and devoured FIFA regulation documents, and just taught myself everything I needed to know and connected with agents so that I could learn from them. And so I've always been someone who has, optimism, but maybe a hint of naivety that I'll figure it out. And so yeah, I mean, I went into it. I started Shift because I wanted to be different than other agents. I wanted to be a human being first. I wanted to be there for the players and as they started this journey because there's so many unknowns. You don't know what you're walking into. And I knew that there weren't many agents out there helping Canadians, especially the ones coming out of university. So it was really an untapped market. And so I started it for that demographic because I was that player.
Mhm.
I wanted to build a pathway for them, and I'm really proud of the work that I did. I was able to help a handful of players, and I never set out for that to become a huge thing. I never set out to do it as a full-time job. It's being an agent is very hard. It's very taxing emotionally,
Mhm.
and it's yeah, kind of time consuming, but
Well, it's
I wanted to do
definitely,
right by
yeah.
Canadian players.
Mhm. And I feel like it's definitely an experience that it's going to come valuable, obviously, with now being a sporting director, which leads me perfectly into the next question of what was your reaction like when you heard interest from the Wild, or you got to hear that there was a Calgary Wild coming together?
hmm Yeah, I had been living in Nova Scotia at the time when Project 8 was first announced. And I was a little bit in the know before it was announced just because of the industry that I was working in at the time. And I mean, as I said, I didn't set out to be an agent for the rest of my life. And so I had heard rumors for a long time about the potential of a Canadian Pro League, and I knew that I wanted to make the transition from the agency to a club. It was just really unclear when or how I would do that. So I got proactive. I started doing a bit of work with the Wanderers, the CPL team in Halifax, just to get a behind look at the club, how they operate. And I sought out some mentorship from their sporting director. And then I ended up doing some formal education in kind of football club management and sporting directorship. I like learning, I like being prepared. So I kind of wanted to arm myself in the best way possible to bring the most value I could to any club. And so when the opportunity came to get involved with Calgary, I knew I had to do it. And I was actually planning to move back to Calgary anyways, so the timing worked out pretty perfectly. So I'm very excited I get to actually do this in my hometown. I think that makes it extra special.
Can you tell me about the process of building a roster, putting a team together from scratch? Because I think that's a big question mark that a lot of followers of the league are really interested about. It's like, how do you put players together when it's happening before a head coach is appointed? How does that look like from behind the scenes and from a sporting director lens?
Yeah, I feel like there must be like a good metaphor for building something from scratch. But it's nonstop, I'll tell you that. I'm glued to my phone. I feel like the people in my life, they love me, but I just feel like I'm always a little bit focused on I kind of split focus, I guess. A lot of it is I'm just on the phone with agents, I'm texting players and clubs at all hours of the day. I mean, with time zones, you end up working really late sometimes, and then I wake up to millions of messages. So it's not very glamorous, I'll say that. But I was pretty used to this, the agent work is essentially the mirror of what I'm doing. I'm working with agents now. So it's very busy. I mean, we're recruiting an entire roster, right? It's not just we're looking to fill a few gaps. It's 20 to 25 players all at once. So I'm basically glued to a screen, either talking to someone or watching game video. And that I think is the biggest part of it. You know, we don't have the luxury of seeing all these players in person. So me and all of the other clubs, we're relying really heavily on video. So that's mostly what my day looks like on top of, all the other things with building a club, but building the roster from scratch. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's really enjoyable and it's exciting to have a vision for the team and developing your targets for each position and just getting after it. And it's great working with a coach too, who has, very similar vision and we're aligned on that. So
Tell me about the vision of Calgary Wild on the pitch.
yeah. We, I mean, I come from a soccer background, obviously. I'm an athlete, so I want to win. No doubt about it. But that said, I mean, while winning is important to a successful franchise, we want to build a sustainable club. Sustainability needs to exist in all corners of a club, but talking about on field, talking about the sporting side, we need to make sure that we're building a team that will be successful, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, not just winning a championship in year one and kind of gradually going downhill from there. So we're bringing in players that, are really excited about being part of this league and this club from day one.
Hmm.
There's a certain energy that comes with that. Um, and excuse me, so our recruitment is focused on bringing Canadians home. I think you'll hear all of the teams saying that. There's a ton of Canadians who have been playing abroad for a number of years. So we need to bring in players who know what it means to be a pro, right? Because we haven't seen that here.
Hmm.
Um, and we're also looking to bring in internationals, of course. We've signed a few already. Um, and they'll raise the standard, of course, and most other countries, they've been playing pro since they were teenagers, or they've at least been exposed to it. And then there's some fantastic local talent in Calgary as well in the mix. So it's equally important to invest in our system and our pathway here. And we're very committed to building out our academy program and a true pathway, to the first team all the way down to grassroots, because the long-term goal is to develop players here at home in Canada, right? And so it'll take time, but we're committed to it, absolutely. And I guess more broadly, the vision, we want to participate globally, in international transfers, which I mean, evidently we already have, but down the road, we want to be selling players on and becoming an attractive club for other clubs, to seek talent. So the goal of this league is to become a top five league. And so the decisions we're making today align with that goal.
Hmm. What's a message you have for some NSL and Calgary Wild fans that are very eagerly looking forward to kick off in April?
Yeah, I mean, I we're so excited to have all the support we've had. I think first of all, just thank you to everyone in the city and in the province. The community's really gotten behind us, and that's something from day one that's been really important to us is we want this team to feel like it belongs to the community, it belongs to the city. And I mean, that's in a lot of intangible ways, but also right down to investing. We've opened it up so that anyone in the community can own a piece of this team. It's not just multimillionaires that are a part of this. And so I'm really excited for our first home game to see, all of our fans and our players on the pitch and everyone there who made this happen, right? From players, staff, investors, ownership to the fans, I think that'll be such an incredible moment. And our first game probably be later than everyone else's because Calgary winter, but
Yep.
can't
Fir-
wait regardless.
First game, for first home game for every team, but just the first kickoff game, I think is going to be so historical, so exciting. Alex, I wanted to ask a few fun questions about you, and hopefully you give us some good tips and tricks about those who will be visiting Calgary, obviously to watch some of the Wild games. What would
Okay.
you say is a good spot to grab food after a game in Calgary?
That's a good question. I mean, Calgary's big, so you probably have to drive a little bit. One of my favorite places is called Rain Dog. It's called
Mm.
Rain Dog Bar. It's in Inglewood. It's kind of like upstairs in this old brick building, and they have just like a very curated, carefully crafted menu.
Mm.
And the owner selects all of the like beer and wine. There's a huge beer menu if you're into beer. And I just love it. It's very quiet. I don't really like loud, big
Mhm.
loud restaurants where I can't hear anybody.
Mhm.
Um, my other favorite is a brewery. It's called Annex
Mm.
Ales, but they also are paired with a local burger joint called
Ooh,
Little Empire. And that's like honestly my favorite place to go. And they also have salty cheese. I don't know if you've had
I
salty
have
cheese. It may
not.
be a French thing, like a Quebecois thing, but it's like this like stringy salty cheese, and I can't explain it. You just have to
Mm.
experience it.
Burgers and a beer after a game, I feel like would be a popular pick for a lot of people. We've just given them a very good tourist guide when they're visiting Calgary to check out the wild. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. I very much look forward to watching Calgary kick it off very, very soon.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.